it. Well done. This is the view that the coaches would have had as they entered Tuxford. The building was positioned so that you could see it at the centre of the road. Next. The hounds actually used to meet outside the building, so they were in effect meeting in the middle of the Great North Road, which shows how little traffic there must have been in those days. Can you imagine anybody trying to meet anybody in the middle of the A1? It would be an annihilation. This is the state the building was in when we bought it. It had been empty and vandalized for about 10 years and was on the listed buildings at risk register. When we looked round it, the agent actually said to us, anybody buying this would be mad. Well, we were mad, but we were also very lucky because we couldn't actually see half of the building when we looked into it because nobody knew how to get into it. Before they showed us round, they removed the mattresses and the needles, and it was a mess. We did a lot of work on the building. This was what it looked like inside, just outside the entrance to the museum. And that's what it looks like now. The courtyard was totally overgrown. We cleared out all the greenery and then set to on the buildings themselves. And this was the final result after we'd cobbled the yard and tidied it all up. Funnily enough, it was the trust that first put the idea of a museum in my mind. Robert Fountain, who I'm sure a number of you will know, knew of my collection and about 30 years ago asked me if I would make a display for the trust to have a visit and see it all. And so that was the first time. Then we opened the museum about 10 years ago, and again, the trust were one of the first groups to visit. And this was to see the World War I exhibition that we put on. This is Colin Henderson, who some of you will certainly know, and who's been very helpful to my museum. He's a great coaching man and an international judge. And he knew of a mail coach that was looking for lodgings, and he knew of our coach house and was able to put the two together for me. But he described this picture for me, and this was what really triggered my interest in coaching. If you look at this, you'll see that the fellow is in 18th century costume. The horses have cropped ears, which was a fashion in the last quarter of the 18th century, and a fantail, which is more than a dock tail. It's a tail where the muscles have been cut underneath, and the tail can never be pulled down again by the horse. A horrid thing to do to it. If you look at the coach, you will see where the window should be, there's a little oval, and that is actually the window, so that passengers can see out, but no one can see in, because of course there was a great risk of robbery in those days, highwaymen. The Regency stripe on the coach also helps to hide the door, and there's no door handle, so no one can grab it and open it. You'd open it with a key. In the front, on the box where the coachman would sit, it's covered with an ornate cloth, which is called the hammer cloth, because it's over the toolbox. And so my interest in coaching grew, and I started to learn about it. This is an early stage coach. Early stage coaches weren't very well looked after, and things dropped off, like the odd wheel. You were advised to make a will before travelling on one. The basket at the back was intended for parcels, but passengers used to ride in it too. All in all, it was a pretty rough journey. And they say that you never saw a sober coachman before 1790, and you never saw a drunk one afterwards. This is breakfast waiting for the coach. There are 3 coachmen round the fire wearing their Benjamins. That's what you call these heavy caped coats. They've probably been driving through the night and are just warming up. The passengers are having breakfast. There's a chap having a shave, but they'll all be jumping up soon because the guard is outside the window blowing his horn. And if it's a mail coach, he's not going to wait for anybody. I started to collect clothing to go with the coaching room. In the brown coat is a Benjamin, and it's so heavy. Sorry, that's my phone ringing. It's such a heavy coat, I can barely lift it. The little outfit in the middle is a replica of the mail coach guard's coat and came from Bertram Mills Circus. This was the little man who drove the miniature coach for marketing purposes. And on the left is the coachman's outfit from Althorpe, Princess Diana's home, the ceremonial outfit. And on the right, as the first signs of my boot fetish, those are postilion boots. On the continent, instead of driving the coach from the box seat, the coach was pulled by horses ridden by postilions. And there's a pole that goes up between the horses, so you need these big, heavy boots to protect your leg from the pole. And they're made of boiled leather, which is very hard, and iron bands around them. And talking of ceremonial pieces, this is the Saddlers Company's ceremonial harness from the 18th century. Unfortunately, by the time I got it, the rest of the harness had disintegrated somewhere, but aren't they beautiful pieces? More clothing. The coat on the left is from the coaching revival, from a coach called the Nimrod. And when that was in use, it would have been bright lemon yellow. The one on the right is the cape from Althorpe that would have been worn over the coachman's clothes in foul weather. In the middle is Colin Pawson, who, again, is an amazing coaching man who has won the horn blowing championship a number of times at Windsor. And he gives these marvellous talks. We're hoping we could get him up to give a talk to the Trust. He illustrates the journey of a coach with all the coaching calls on the way. Well worth hearing if you get an opportunity to hear him. This is what the old coaching inns in London would have looked like. You can see all the rooms are entered from the galleries, which in days when hygiene wasn't quite so good was probably a very good idea. The coach is about to leave. The mail coach will go off to the post office, collect the mail, and all the coaches left the post office between 8 and 8:20 at night, off to their various destinations. If you were riding on one of those mail coaches, you can see there are seats up behind the driver. Excuse me. And sorry, I'm losing my voice. One of the seats hangs over the edge, and if you were sitting there on a nice warm night, it's possible you might fall asleep and drop off the coach. Hence the saying, dropped off. This is a lockable clock. This was one of the keys to the success of the mail coaches. The guard was given this when he left the post office, and he couldn't interfere with the time of it. And the mail coaches had to run to a strict timetable and were fined if they didn't keep the time. And as he stopped at each inn on the way, he would give the innkeeper the time, which was what began to standardize time throughout the country. And he'd give him the news as well. And this was where the saying, passing the time of day, comes from. The mail coaches were always in a hurry, and here you can see the old girl passing the mail up onto the coach, and the guard throwing the new mail bag down to her. This was also the time, late 18th century was the time of tokens. Tokens were invented because there was a shortage of small coinage, and with the Industrial Revolution growing, there were people needing to be paid. Big business people were allowed to print their own coins, and they paid their staff with them, but they insisted that their staff did their shopping in the owner's shop. So they kept fairly tight control on the money. These are a few of the items in my coaching room. Bottom left is a Bordelou or coach pot, and Francois Boucher chose to illustrate how it was used. Of course, if you were traveling in a coach, you couldn't stop the coach if you needed to. So it's been quite useful to have that. Above it is a little coach lantern. It's a candle lantern, and you would hang it in the coach. The flap at the top would reflect the light down onto your book. And when you got to the inn, the little stem at the bottom would pull out and give you a stand to stand it on. I don't think it would have been very secure, but maybe that's what happened to our coaching inn when it burnt down. Top right is a dog bowl, a very smart dog bowl, and beneath it is a dog collar. And of course, private carriages took dogs with them, partly to guard the coach when they were not in it. And these collars always had padlocks on them. So maybe dog theft was as bad then as it is now. Early road maps. This is Ogilvy's map. Prior to this, maps would have shown waterways rather than roadways, because waterways were how people traveled. These maps particularly showed the important houses en route, because if you were driving privately, you would call in to see people's houses and sometimes stay there, even though you may not have met the host at all. Going back to Tudor times, this was how you found the way. These lists show the routes to various towns, but of course you would have had to have a guide too, because there wouldn't be marked roads in a lot of places. You would just be riding across moorland, and so someone would have to show you the way. You'd have to cross water. In a lot of cases, you would cross on a ferry, and this is Datchet Ferry near Windsor. Inns had extremely big signs. Presumably, the bigger the sign, the more likely you were to get customers. There's still an overhead sign in Stamford in Lincolnshire. If you were wealthy and you went on the grand tour, and we think this is Cooper Henderson's family because they went on the grand tour, and this is by him, the owners would ride in the carriage, the servants sit on the back. In the front is the coachman, who, because they are now on the continent, is redundant and has become another manservant. And the carriage is being pulled by postilions, as I mentioned before. Pretty rough fellows, and they and the horses would have changed every 7 leagues, which is about 10 miles, depending on the roads of the area. The fellow in the blue coat would be the guide, showing them the way to go. If you weren't so wealthy, you would arrive there on foot, and you could get on a ship in London on the Thames, in the centre of London, and sail off to France. When you arrived there, you'll be looking for the diligence, which is the French equivalent to our stagecoach, a much bigger vehicle with 3 compartments, people travelling on the top. And yet people who travelled in it said it went as fast as our stagecoaches. It was pulled by 5 horses. And you can see it was just after the French Revolution, these poor chaps in the front here, one having lost one leg and the other appears to have lost both legs. Back in England, if you were travelling by mail coach, which was first-class travel, unless you were travelling in your own carriage, if you had a steep hill to climb, then unless you were very important or very old and infirm, like the person in the carriage, you would get out and walk. Sometimes you even had to push. And on steep hills, some steep hills, they had a cock horse, which was ridden, and the cock horse would be hitched to the front of the team to give extra pulling power. They had put on stones and take off stones at the bottom and top of the hill excuse me, to make sure that the cock horse didn't have to work further than was intended. If anybody knows of any put on and take off stones, I'd love to know. Unfortunately, most of them lost in road widening. If you got stuck in a snowdrift, then again, the passengers were stuck in the coach. The guard who was responsible for the mail had to take one of the horses and the mail bags and get them through. And there are sad tales of guards being frozen to death in the snow. The passengers would have to wait for someone to dig the coach out. Here's a private carriage, a dog cart going off to the moors, and they'd have their pointers or setters, whatever they were using, in the box under the carriage there. The trains had felt the death knell for the coaching period, but in the transitional period, coaches were put on the back of the trains if the train was covering the part of the journey that the coach was normally covering. Other transport on the roads was, of course, the carriers, and there are carriers recorded from as early as the 1400s with timetables and very organised routes. This fellow is a wagoner. You can see his wagon in the back there. He would have ridden on his pony to guide the wagon, and his wagon horses will be grazing somewhere around the back there. And this is by Moreland. Moreland always put these funny little houses on the outside of his inn. Sometimes it's a bootmaker, but I don't think that's necessarily always the case. Posters for the carriers. We have quite a lot of paper in our collection. And the alternative to the wagon were the pack horses that were used on areas that weren't suitable for wagons. And the pack bridges were very narrow, and these walls have since been built up. The wall would have been probably about the height of that brown area at the bottom there, because of course the wall mustn't drag on the packs, mustn't knock the packs. And you'll find sometimes the pack bridges are built beside a ford that you could have driven a carriage through, but if you took the pack horses through the ford, then the bundles of wool or whatever they were carrying would have got wet. So there was a pack bridge built beside it. These are post horses. That's horses that you hire to ride from post to post. Nothing to do with the mail. And we have there a stamp office ticket for hiring a horse. Everything, like today, everything was taxed. At the end of the 19th century was the coaching revival. People who regretted the loss of the mail coaches, very wealthy people, started running road coaches and doing various other things in driving. Rothschild was bet that he couldn't produce a team of 4 zebra to pull a carriage. So he paid this chap on the carriage, chap called Hardy, to find and break a team of zebra to drive, which I believe took him 2 years, but they look quite contented, don't they? Back to my boots. This is what they call a gambardo. These were hung on the saddle, and you slid your foot into them to keep your boot and your breeches clean. And this little naive sketch shows a man using one. Yeah, we've lost the other boot there. That was to illustrate the 17th century boots, which we have a pair of. Oxfordshire Hussars boots. All Hussars boots were very decorative, but these are particularly decorative. They normally have this shaped front, and here we've got braid and decoration around them. And these are particularly interesting because they have the creases put into the ankles of the boot, so that when your boot flexed, it didn't make ugly creases.
Can't tell where this museum is.
Sorry? The
Gallery and museum together. It's like a
What?
It's her gallery and museum together, and it's like a 17th century building.
I think
Sounds like
needs to switch off the mic. So that takes us into the military room. This is a cowrie shell bridle, which is quite rare, very pretty. And the theory of it, I'm told, was that it stopped the sword hitting.
I think there was a place when you signed in.
Steve, can you switch off your microphone? Right. Okay, next page. In the military room, we have gas masks. I think we have probably the largest collection of gas masks in the world, but unfortunately we can't put them all on show. But the one on the left is Eastern European post-World War II, which makes you think. The other one is a German one. This is an English military saddle, circa 1850. I have a passion for saddles, and we have quite a large collection of them. The one on the left here is from California, and all that decoration is silver thread. It really is a beautiful saddle. When I bought it, I bought it in auction. The auctioneer didn't think it was worth illustrating, and they catalogued it as an unusual saddle. So I chanced it and put £35 on it and bought it. And when it came home, I was just amazed. The one on the right is an African saddle with all its trappings. Quite unusual to see them with all the trappings still in place. This is an Italian cowboy saddle. People don't realize the Italians have cowboys, but they're from the Maremma Hills just south of Florence. And this is an amazingly comfortable saddle, but that great depth of padding is enormous, and it meant that I had to keep the saddle in a freezer for about 9 months to get rid of the moth. When I was young, there were always westerns on the television, so I was very well aware of Wells Fargo. And the saddle on the right there is a Wells Fargo agent's saddle. It's a beautiful saddle, lovely leather. It's seen a lot of wear, but it was built for work. The one on the left is a Native American saddle. Now, the cowboy films indicated that they didn't have saddles, but actually the elderly and the women did. this saddle would have had good cushioning over it. It's covered in buffalo hide, and the fans of the saddle are actually made from old packing cases. The back and front of it would have had beads hanging down to decorate it, and the hook at the front, which is partially broken off, is where the baby would have been hung on it to travel down the side of the horse's shoulder. Before we had westerns and television, Buffalo Bill Cody brought the West to England and had his show traveling around England. On the right there, we have a collection of barbed wire. You may wonder why, that it's known as the fall of the cowboy, because once barbed wire was developed, then the cowboys lost their jobs. They didn't need, by any means, so many cowboys. We have lots of spurs. Top left are very pretty little spurs, boot spurs with dolphins on. A lot of spurs were decorated with animal heads. The one on the right, top right, is from Argentina. Bottom right is Chile. That's a tiny little Roman spur in the middle. And the bottom left is an African spur, most wicked thing. Here are some more top left Austro-Hungarian, decorated with little jewels, very pretty. Top right is an 18th century Mexican spur. Bottom left is a Roman spur, a little bronze spur. And the ones on the right are dress spurs, or as I like to call them, dancing spurs. They have no points on the rowels, they're totally smooth, so that when the officers were dancing, and of course these were part of their dress, the rowels didn't tear the ladies' skirts if they got caught in them. We have a collection of early bits, and these are Roman or Romano-Celtic, as people prefer to call them. The long cheeks make people think that they're curved, but they are not. The way that they work, they can't act as a curb, and the curb hasn't been invented at this stage. These are more early bits. The one on the right is bronze and probably 400 to 600 BC. The one in the middle, maybe a little bit later, again bronze, but now has an iron mouthpiece. And the one on the left is Byzantine, about 9th century, and was, I'm sure, a ring bit originally, and I think that's where the curb began. These are ring bits, if you're not familiar with them. If you look at the one in the center there, you can see the mouthpiece with a T shape. That T goes into the horse's mouth. The ring hangs down, as in the one on the right. The horse's jaw goes through the ring, and all the mouthpiece and T are in the mouth, so that when you pull the rein, the ring acts like a curb. This is just a small selection of some of the bits we have on show. These are just English bits, mostly 19th century. Stirrups, we have a wide selection of stirrups. These are African, and the African pieces have more different styles than pretty much anywhere else. Left are wooden stirrups, mostly South American, some Mexican, and on the right are a few of our horseshoes. We have a good selection of horseshoes. They are quite fascinating. That's a stirrup light on the left. Again, quite an early one. And early lamps had very thin glass. So they often had, as this has, a little door to fix over the glass in the daytime to protect it. On the right are a selection of slipper stirrups, which were the first safety stirrups, really. The 4 leather ones are English, and the bottom right is South American. Saddles. We have a large, well, we have an exhibition of the side saddle on at the moment. The saddle on the left is a pillion saddle, in which a lady would sit sideways behind the man on the horse. And they used what they call double horses to carry the 2 saddles. The one in the middle is a self-fermier or farmer's wife saddle. Again, these have been around from very early days, although this is 19th or even early 20th century. But you would sit sideways on that with your foot on the planchette, and it was for elderly or infirm people, and somebody would lead the horse. It was a means of transport. The one on the right is an early side saddle, a pretty dangerous saddle. Those 2 heads would really trap your right leg, and the stirrup would be fixed. It wouldn't release you if you fell. So quite a lot of ladies met nasty ends on saddles like that. This just shows a couple of ladies riding pillion, rather rotund ladies, 4 old horses. This is part of our side saddle collection, early side saddle habits. It's quite often to find a jacket with no skirt, because during the war, the skirts were cut up to make clothes for children. Rugging has always fascinated me. That's quite early rugging on the left, when they used to rug horses to make them sweat because they believed it was good to get them fit. And having got them sweating, they'd bring them back to the stable and put more rugs on them to make them sweat even harder. But the rugging on the right, which is in the museum, is late 19th century, and that also comes from Althorpe. There's the Spencer crest on the bottom corner. In our heavy horse department, one of my favourite items are the team bells. I don't think they'd have been the horse's favourite. They make an awful row. These are 18th century, and they were fixed to the saddle of the plough horse, the horses pulling a dray, because people needed to know who was coming, because you couldn't back a dray up when it was pulled on chains. And horses, of course, powered everything, powered the Industrial Revolution. On the left there, they're working a grindstone, and on the right, a gin. The pit pony department has an array of various hoods and other equipment. A tough life for pit ponies. At the heart of the mining time for ponies, they reckoned that some pits killed as many as 5 ponies a week. In fact, apparently, Iceland banned their ponies from shipped to England because we ran out of ponies and kept importing ponies for the mines. The veterinary cabinets are quite interesting. And the piece on the left there is an anti-cribbing device that you hung in the horse's mouth, and it stopped it closing its mouth so it couldn't crib. When you think that cribbing is often caused by pain or discomfort, that just adds to it. A wicked thing to use. When we have visits to the museum, when we have groups coming, we often put on a curious item collection for people to guess what the things were for, and it's always very much enjoyed. So I've put 4 items here. The sizes are out of proportion, but I wonder if you can name what they are. Put it in your chat if you can. 3 of them are relatively easy. We might struggle with the 4th. I'll tell you at the end what they are. Christmas time, and we have a Christmas fair in the car park. And Father Christmas comes along and brings his reindeer to the courtyard. And I'm proud to say that we were awarded a Knox Heritage Award when we opened the museum. You see, I look smug, don't you? Ah, we've lost the other. Right. I think haven't really given people time to think about the items. Can we go back to the items and I'll tell people what they are? Right. On the left there is a metal twitch. I'm sure you all know what a twitch is, but that's a metal one. Top center is a blood hammer. That's a hammer for knocking the fleam in. And of course, they used to bleed horses regularly. Whatever was wrong with them, they'd draw off a pint or two of blood. I suppose the theory was that it reduced inflammation. I don't know whether it did, but I think they killed probably more than they did any good to. The one on the right there is a tube for tubing horses. When a horse, oh, I'm not a vet, but a horse can grow a sort of membrane over part of its throat, which interferes with its breathing. Nowadays, you simply remove that membrane and it's fine. But they didn't know that up until early part of the 20th century. So they used to make a tracheotomy, really, and put this tube into the windpipe, put a lid on it, and you take the lid off when you were working the horse. And when it came back, you'd put the lid back on to keep the bedding out of it, but you'd have to clean it out regularly. Pretty horrid. And then the thing in the middle at the bottom is a pair of docking shears, because everything was docked. But I don't think they use them very often. I think they usually threw them, used a sledgehammer and a blade and just chopped through the tail. Right. So thank you for listening. If you're tempted now, please do come and have a look. There's a lot more there to see.
Sally, I'm going to talk. Are you hearing me?
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
I can, on and off, yes.
Oh, right. Can I just say that it's going to be difficult with the technology, but thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's much appreciated. I've seen more than I did last time, so I must come back to Tuxford and see. And I'd urge everybody to go and see what you're doing at the museum. Thank you. If anybody has got questions, could they please direct them to Kate, and then we'll pass them on to Sally. My apologies for the technical problems. As you can guess, I'm speaking on the phone and not through the Zoom system. So, Sally, thank you very much. It's much appreciated. Our next lecture is on the 16th of October, when we've invited Erica Monkowitz to talk to us about women's involvement in equestrianism. We'll send out all the details before the lecture. So thank you, Sally. It's much appreciated. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right, Kate. We got through it. Well done.
I'm sorry. I don't know what I did wrong.
Well, we'll have to find out. But it's the 16th of November. You've got 2 months.
Oh, I'll have it done before then. I thought I'd followed all exactly the same.
Don't worry. Relax. Let's put it into a learning experience, as they say nowadays.
That's very kind of you, Tim. Thank you.
Can you hear me? You're
Yes.
still live.
Right. Well, I was apologising also to you, Sally, there.
Don't worry.
With that today.